I was hunched over my workbench, the sterile smell of antiseptic and the soft hum of high-tech equipment filling my senses, when the phone rang. It was the kind of ring that sliced through the usual lab noise, cutting my concentration like a scalpel. I glanced at the caller ID. Alex. My younger brother rarely called during the day. Something was wrong. "Alex, what's up?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Maya, it's bad. Real bad." His voice wavered, and I could hear the tremor in it. "People in Greenwood. They're changing." I straightened, my grip tightening on the phone. "What do you mean, changing?" "They're mutating, Maya. Physically. Some have, I don't know, powers. Like super strength. But others are getting these horrible deformities. It's spreading fast. You need to come home." For a moment, the world seemed to narrow down to the sound of his voice. Mutations. Powers. It sounded like something out of a comic book, not our sleepy hometown, nestled in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. "I'll be there as soon as I can," I promised, already mentally cataloguing what I'd need to take with me. "Hang in there, Alex." The drive from New Hope to Greenwood took just under 3 hours, but it felt like an eternity. The further I got from the city, the more the landscape changed. Glass and steel gave way to endless stretches of farmland and dense forests, as the air growing crisper and more familiar. I had always loved this drive as a kid, watching the rolling hills appear like waves on the horizon. But today, all I felt was a gnawing dread. As I entered Greenwood, it was like stepping back in time. The town square looked the same as ever, with its old brick buildings, the general store, the small clinic, and the local diner where everyone gathered. But something was off. The usual bustle was muted, the faces of the townsfolk drawn and anxious. Fear hung in the air like a storm cloud. I parked outside the diner and took a deep breath before stepping out. The familiar chime of the bell above the door felt like a cruel mockery of normalcy. "Maya, over here." Alex waved from a corner booth. His face was pale, eyes wide with worry. I slid into the seat opposite him, noting the uneaten plate of fries and the cup of coffee gone cold. "Tell me everything," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. He ran a hand through his hair, looking older than his 25 years. "It started a few weeks ago. People began showing weird symptoms. At first, it was small stuff. Strange rashes, slight changes in strength or agility. But then it got worse. Much worse. Old man Harris can barely walk now, and Mrs. Thompson's kid. He broke a door clean off its hinges without even trying." "Have you seen Dr. Bishop?" I asked. "What's his take on this?" Alex frowned. "He's been helpful, I guess, but secretive. He's doing what he can, but I don't think he knows much more than the rest of us. That's why I called you. We need your expertise." I nodded, absorbing the information. "I'll start with an initial investigation. Collect some data and samples. We need to figure out what's causing this." Alex looked relieved, but I could see the lingering fear in his eyes. "Thanks, Maya. It's good to have you home." Home. The word felt heavy. Greenwood had always been home, but now it felt like a stranger. As I left the diner, I couldn't shake the feeling that something dark was lurking beneath the surface of this quaint rural town. Return to Greenwood. Walking through Greenwood, I saw familiar faces etched with worry. Mrs. Thompson stood on her porch, wringing her hands as she watched her son play in the yard, his movements too quick, too strong for a boy his age. Mr. Harris struggled with his walker, his legs twisted in unnatural angles. This wasn't just a few isolated incidents. This was an epidemic. The clinic was my next stop. I needed to talk to Dr. Bishop. The building was small, a single-story structure with a whitewashed exterior and a neatly kept garden. Inside, it smelled of antiseptic and anxiety. "Dr. Bishop is in his office," the receptionist said, her voice tight. She didn't make eye contact. I knocked on the door and entered without waiting for a response. Dr. Bishop looked up from his cluttered desk his eyes narrowing as he recognized me. "Maya," he said, leaning back in his chair, "I heard you were back." "I need to know what's going on, Dr. Bishop. Alex told me about the mutations. This is beyond anything we've seen before." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "It's been a nightmare. People are scared, and frankly, so am I. I've been trying to manage it, but this is beyond the scope of my practice. I suspect something unusual is at play here." "Unusual how?" I pressed. Dr. Bishop hesitated, then leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I've seen signs that suggest genetic manipulation, but this isn't something natural. It's too precise, too targeted." A chill ran down my spine. Genetic manipulation? Do you have any idea who could be behind this? He shook his head. "Not yet. But whoever it is, they're using our town as a testing ground. We need to stop this before it gets worse." "I'm setting up a lab in my old house," I said. "I'll start collecting samples and data. We need to figure out exactly what we're dealing with." Dr. Bishop nodded. "Let me know if you need any help. And Maya, be careful. There's more to this than meets the eye." Reunion with Raphael. I left the clinic with a sense of urgency thrumming through my veins. As I headed towards my childhood home, I couldn't help but think of Raphael. We hadn't spoken in years, not since I left for the city. But if anyone could give me more insight into what was happening, it was him. His farm was on the outskirts of town, a sprawling expanse of land that had been in his family for generations. The drive was short, but my mind was racing. Memories of our time together flooded back. Late-night talks under the stars, stolen kisses in the barn, plans for a future that never came to pass. I shook them off as I pulled up to the farmhouse. Raphael was in the yard, fixing a fence. His daughter Lily was nearby, lifting a bale of hay with an ease that defied her slight frame. The sight of her brought me up short. She looked normal, but I knew better. "Raphael," I called, stepping out of the car. He turned, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. Then he set down his tools and walked over, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Maya," he said, his voice a mix of surprise and something else, something unspoken. "Hey," I said, feeling awkward. "I heard about Lily. I'm here to help." Raphael glanced at his daughter, who was now watching us with curious eyes. "Lily, why don't you go inside and help Grandma with dinner?" Lily nodded and headed towards the house, her movements too fluid, too powerful. Once she was out of earshot, Raphael turned back to me. "She started showing signs a few weeks ago," he said, his voice low. "At first, it was just little things, lifting things she shouldn't be able to, moving faster than usual. But then the joint pain started. It's getting worse, Maya." I nodded, taking out my notebook. "I'm setting up a lab in my old house. I need to collect samples from her and from anyone else affected. We need to understand what's happening." Raphael's jaw tightened. "Whatever you need. Just help her, Maya, please." I looked into his eyes and saw the desperation there. This wasn't just a scientific challenge. It was personal. And I was determined to find answers. Initial investigation, setting up the lab in my old basement, was like stepping into a time warp. The space was cluttered with remnants of my father's work. Old equipment, stacks of research papers, faded photographs. I pushed aside the memories and got to work, assembling my equipment and preparing for the task ahead. Alex helped me gather samples from the affected residents. Each case was unique, but there were disturbing similarities, enhanced abilities paired with debilitating side effects. The more data I collected, the clearer it became that this was no natural mutation. The genetic anomalies were too precise, too engineered. Raphael brought Lily to the house, and I took samples from her, noting the unusual markers in her DNA. She was brave, but I could see the fear in her eyes. She didn't understand what was happening to her, and that made it all the more urgent to find a solution. As the days passed, my findings pointed to a sophisticated gene-editing virus. The precision of the mutations suggested deliberate manipulation. Someone had targeted Greenwood, using its residents as guinea pigs. The question was, who and why? One evening, as I pored over my data, Alex burst into the lab, his face pale. "Maya, you need to see this," he said, thrusting a tablet into my hands. I looked at the screen and felt my blood run cold. It was a message from a group calling themselves the Genomic Front. They claimed responsibility for the virus and offered a deal. Join them, and they would provide the cure. My mind raced. The Genomic Front was a radical group known for their extreme views on human evolution through genetic modification. They believed in pushing the boundaries of human potential, no matter the cost, and now they had set their sights on Greenwood. I knew I couldn't trust them, but I needed more information. I had to find a way to infiltrate their ranks, to understand their motives, and get the cure for Lily and the others. The stakes were higher than ever. This wasn't just about Greenwood. It was about the future of genetic science and the ethics that governed it. I had to stop the Genomic Front before they could do more damage. With a heavy heart, I prepared to contact them, to play their game and gather the information we needed. It was a dangerous move, but I had no choice. The fate of my hometown, and perhaps the world, depended on it. The old factory loomed in front of us like a forgotten giant. Its brick walls covered in vines, rusting machinery scattered around the grounds. The air was thick with the smell of decaying metal and damp earth. Raphael parked the truck, and we both sat in silence for a moment, taking in the sight. "This place gives me the creeps," Raphael muttered, his eyes scanning the surroundings. I nodded. "Let's get this over with." We grabbed our gear and made our way to the entrance. The factory had been abandoned for decades, a relic from Greenwood's industrial past. The doors creaked ominously as we pushed them open, revealing a vast, shadowy interior. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that filtered through broken windows. "Stick close," I said, my voice echoing in the cavernous space. "We don't know what we're dealing with." Raphael nodded, his expression grim. We moved cautiously, the beams of our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The main floor was a maze of rusting equipment and debris, each step stirring up clouds of dust. We found the entrance to the basement in the back, half hidden behind a pile of old crates. The stairs leading down were steep and narrow, the air growing colder and more oppressive with each step. The basement was a different world entirely. Dimly lit by flickering overhead lights, it was cluttered with old equipment and crates, the walls lined with shelves filled with dusty jars and tools. The sense of foreboding was palpable. "This place is a nightmare," Raphael whispered, his voice barely audible. "Yeah," I agreed, my heart pounding. "Let's find what we need and get out of here." We moved through the basement, our flashlights sweeping over the clutter. It felt like we were walking through a graveyard of forgotten experiments. Then, in the far corner, we found it, a hidden door, slightly ajar. I pushed it open, revealing a small, dimly lit room. Inside, a lab unlike any I'd seen before. Advanced gene-editing equipment filled the space, the sleek, high-tech machines starkly contrasting the decay outside. My breath caught in my throat. "Raphael, look at this," I said, my voice trembling. He stepped in beside me, his eyes widening. "What the hell is this place?" I approached a workbench cluttered with papers and files. "It looks like someone was running a genetic experiment, and from the looks of it, a pretty sophisticated one." We began searching through the documents, our urgency growing with each passing second. The more we uncovered, the more horrifying the picture became. Detailed notes on genetic manipulation, charts showing the progression of mutations, and then a list of names. My heart sank as I read through them. Raphael, Lily's on this list, along with half the town. He stared at the names, his face pale. They targeted us. Someone deliberately did this to us. I clenched my fists, rage bubbling up inside me. We need to find out who, and we need to stop them. Dr. Bishop's offer. Back at the clinic, Dr. Bishop's office was a stark contrast to the eerie basement we'd just left. It was clean, orderly, and filled with the faint scent of antiseptic. He looked up as we entered, his expression guarded. "Maya, Raphael, what brings you here?" His tone was calm, but there was an edge to it. "We found a hidden lab in the old factory," I said, getting straight to the point. "It's filled with advanced gene-editing equipment and documents detailing genetic experiments. There's a list of names, Dr. Bishop. Half the town is on it, including Lily." His eyes flickered with something. Surprise, fear, guilt. It was hard to tell. "I see. Do you know anything about this?" Raphael asked, his voice tight with barely restrained anger. Dr. Bishop sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I suspected there was more to this than met the eye. I've been studying the mutations, trying to understand them, but I didn't know about the lab." "Do you expect us to believe that?" I demanded. "You've been monitoring the town's population for years. How could you not know?" He steepled his fingers, his gaze steady. "I've been collecting genetic data, yes, but my aim was to understand the changes, not cause them. If what you're saying is true, then someone else is responsible for releasing the virus." "Then who?" Raphael pressed. Dr. Bishop hesitated, then lowered his voice. "There's a group called the Genomic Front. They believe in pushing the boundaries of human potential through genetic modification. They're extremists, willing to do anything to achieve their goals." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Are you saying they're behind this?" "It's a possibility," he admitted. "But without concrete evidence, it's just speculation. We need to investigate further." "Fine," I said, my mind racing, "but we'll need your help. If we're going to stop this, we need all the information we can get." Dr. Bishop nodded. "I'll do what I can. But be careful, Maya. The Genomic Front is dangerous. They won't hesitate to eliminate anyone who gets in their way." Town Hall Meeting. That evening, the town hall was packed. The usually quiet, serene setting was now buzzing with tension. People crowded into the small space, their faces a mix of fear, anger, and confusion. Alex stood beside me, his presence a steadying force. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice amplified by the old microphone. "I know you're scared. I am too. But we need to talk about what's happening in our town." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Thompson stood up, her face drawn. "My son's condition is getting worse. He's stronger than ever, but his pain is unbearable. What's causing this?" I took a deep breath. "We believe it's a gene-editing virus, released deliberately to target our community." The reaction was immediate. Gasps, shouts, accusations. The room erupted in chaos. "Please, calm down," I shouted over the noise. "We're working on finding out who's responsible and how to stop it. But we need your cooperation. If you or your family members are affected, we need samples and data to understand the virus." Raphael stood up next. "We found evidence pointing to a group called the Genomic Front. They're extremists who believe in forced genetic evolution. We think they're behind this." More murmurs, more fear. Mr. Harris, barely able to stand, spoke next. "What can we do?" "Stay vigilant," I said. "Report any suspicious activity. And trust that we're doing everything we can to find a solution." The meeting ended in a tense, uneasy silence. As people filed out, I felt the weight of their fear and trust pressing down on me. This wasn't just about science, it was about saving my home. Raphael and I returned to the abandoned factory the next day, determined to uncover more clues. The basement felt even more oppressive now, the sense of foreboding palpable. We worked methodically, sifting through the documents and examining the equipment. "This equipment is state-of-the-art," I said, inspecting a gene-editing device. "Whoever set this up has serious resources." Raphael was scanning through a folder of notes. "Look at this," he said, handing me a page. "It's a timeline of the mutations. They've been planning this for years." I felt a surge of anger. They used us as lab rats. We continued searching, and finally we found something that made my blood run cold. A video log. The screen flickered to life, showing a man in a lab coat, his face obscured by shadows. "This is Dr. Elias Thorne, head of the Genomic Front," the man began. "We are on the cusp of a new era of human evolution. Our experiments in Greenwood are yielding promising results. Soon, we will unleash our full potential." Raphael's jaw tightened. "We need to take this to Dr. Bishop. He has to see this." Back at the clinic, we showed Dr. Bishop the video log. He watched in silence, his expression grim. "This confirms my worst fears," he said quietly. "The Genomic Front is behind this." "We need to stop them," I said, "but we need more information. How do we find them?" Dr. Bishop leaned back, deep in thought. "There's a contact I have, someone who used to be involved with the Genomic Front. They might be able to help us. But it's risky." "Risky how?" Raphael asked. "They've been in hiding for years. If they agree to help, they'll be putting themselves in danger, and so will we." I glanced at Raphael. "We don't have a choice. We need to find them." Dr. Bishop nodded. "I'll reach out. But in the meantime, keep gathering evidence. The more we have, the better our chances." As we left the clinic, the weight of our findings pressed heavily on us. We drove in silence, the implications of the day's discoveries swirling in our minds. When we reached the farm, Raphael turned to me, his expression troubled. "This is bigger than we thought," he said, "and dangerous. Are you sure we can do this?" I looked at him, seeing the worry etched in his features. "We have to. For Lily, for everyone in Greenwood." He nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. "Maya, there's something else. I've been thinking about your father's work. Do you think he could have been involved?" The question hung in the air, heavy and painful. I had been avoiding that very thought, but now there was no escaping it. "My father was always obsessed with pushing the boundaries of genetic science," I admitted. "It's possible that his research laid the groundwork for the Genomic Front's experiments. But I need to know for sure." Raphael's hand found mine, a comforting, grounding touch. "We'll figure it out together." For a moment, the past didn't matter. It was just the two of us, facing an uncertain future. But the moment passed, and reality came crashing back. "I need to go through my father's papers," I said. "There might be something there that can help us." Raphael nodded. "I'll help you. But Maya, no matter what we find, we'll face it together." I squeezed his hand, grateful for his support. But deep down, I knew that whatever we uncovered could change everything. Our fight against the Genomic Front, our understanding of the virus, and our relationship. As we headed back to my childhood home, the sun set behind the mountains, casting long shadows over Greenwood. The town was caught in a battle for its future, and we were its reluctant warriors. The road ahead was dark and uncertain, but there was no turning back now. We had to unearth the truth, no matter the cost. The next morning, I found myself pacing the floor of my childhood home, my thoughts racing. The revelation that the Genomic Front was behind the virus had hit me hard, and the weight of what I had to do next felt crushing. The sun filtered through the dusty windows, casting long shadows that danced across the worn floorboards. Alex sat at the kitchen table, his face pale and drawn, his eyes fixed on me. "We don't have a choice, Alex," I said, breaking the heavy silence. "We need that cure. I have to infiltrate the Genomic Front." His eyes widened with fear. "Maya, it's too dangerous. These people are extremists. If they find out you're spying on them..." I placed a hand on his shoulder, trying to convey a confidence I didn't feel. "I know the risks, but we need that cure for Lily and everyone else. I can't just stand by and do nothing." Before Alex could protest further, my phone buzzed. The screen displayed an unknown number. I took a deep breath and answered. "Maya Langford." The voice was cold and mechanical, lacking any hint of emotion. "Yes, this is she," I replied. my heart pounding in my chest. "We understand you're interested in joining us. Meet at the old sawmill at dusk. Come alone." The line went dead. I stared at the phone, the weight of the words sinking in. "It's time," I said, looking at Alex. "I need to go." The sawmill loomed in front of me as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in hues of orange and purple. The once bustling mill was now a husk of its former self, its wood splintered and decaying. I parked the car a distance away and approached on foot, my senses heightened by the encroaching darkness. As I reached the entrance, a figure stepped out of the shadows, a man dressed in black from head to toe, his face obscured by a mask. "You're punctual." "Good," he said, his voice echoing with an unnatural calmness. "Follow me." I followed him through the sawmill, the silence between us thick with tension. He led me to a small room at the back, sparsely furnished with a table and 2 chairs. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling, casting a harsh glow over the scene. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to one of the chairs. I obeyed, my mind racing with possible scenarios. He took the seat opposite me, folding his hands on the table. "We are the Genomic Front," he began, his tone clinical. "We believe in the next step of human evolution. Your town is part of our experiment." I fought to keep my expression neutral. "Why target Greenwood?" He tilted his head slightly, as if considering how much to reveal. "It was an ideal testing ground, isolated, with a stable population. Your father's work laid the groundwork for our advancements." The mention of my father sent a jolt of anger through me, but I kept my composure. "What do you want from me?" "We understand you're a geneticist. We could use someone with your expertise. Join us, and we will provide the cure for the mutations." I hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I want to help my town. If joining you is the only way to get the cure, then I'll do it." He studied me for a moment, then stood. "Very well. You'll need to undergo an initiation process. We'll be in touch with the details." He turned to leave, then paused. "Do not cross us, Maya. There will be consequences." With that, he disappeared into the shadows, leaving me alone in the dimly lit room. I let out a shaky breath, the enormity of what I'd just agreed to crashing down on me. I had to play their game, gather information, and somehow find a way to stop them. The following week passed in a blur of preparation and anxiety. I stayed in close contact with Raphael, briefing him on every detail. We devised a plan. He would act as my outside contact, ready to assist if things went sideways. The initiation process began with a series of clandestine meetings. I was introduced to other members, all of whom shared the same cold, clinical demeanor. They spoke in hushed tones about their vision for humanity, their eyes gleaming with a fanaticism that sent chills down my spine. Finally, the day came when they took me to their headquarters. The facility was hidden deep within the forest, a sleek, high-tech fortress that contrasted sharply with Greenwood's rustic charm. The building's exterior was a blend of glass and steel, reflecting the surrounding trees like a surreal mirage. As we entered, I was struck by the stark, sterile interior. Everything was white and chrome, the air filled with the faint hum of machinery. They led me through a series of security checkpoints, each one more advanced than the last, until we reached a large open lab. "This is where the magic happens," my guide said with a twisted smile. I forced a smile in return, my eyes scanning the room. The lab was filled with advanced gene-editing equipment, the same kind we'd found in the abandoned factory. Scientists in white coats moved with precision, their faces obscured by masks. "This way," the guide said, leading me to a smaller room off the main lab. Inside, a woman sat behind a sleek desk, her eyes sharp and assessing. "Maya Langford," she said, her voice a cool monotone. "Welcome. I'm Dr. Evelyn Frost, Head of Research. I understand you're here to assist us." "Yes," I replied, keeping my tone steady. "I want to help my town, and I believe in the potential of genetic advancements." She nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good. We have much to discuss. Follow me." She led me through the lab, explaining their work in detail. They were developing a virus that could selectively enhance human capabilities, but the process was still in its experimental stages. The mutations in Greenwood were their first large-scale test, and they were monitoring the results closely. As she spoke, I gathered as much information as I could, mentally cataloguing everything. I needed to understand their plan, find weaknesses, and locate the data on the cure. Days turned into weeks as I integrated myself into the genomic front's operations. I worked alongside their scientists, careful to play the part of a dedicated researcher. But all the while I was gathering evidence, documenting their plans, and searching for the cure. Raphael and I had devised a covert communication system. He would leave messages and supplies in a hidden spot in the forest, and I would retrieve them during my brief moments of freedom. It was risky, but we had no other choice. One night, I managed to access a secure terminal in the main lab. My hands trembled as I typed, downloading files and photographing documents with a tiny concealed camera. The information was damning: detailed plans for further experiments, charts tracking the progression of the mutations, and finally, the formula for the cure. I felt a surge of triumph as the data transferred, but it was short-lived. A shadow fell across the screen, and I looked up to see Dr. Frost standing behind me, her eyes cold and calculating. "What are you doing, Maya?" she asked, her voice devoid of emotion. I swallowed hard, my mind racing for an excuse. I was reviewing the data on the mutations. I wanted to cross-reference it with my own findings. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Be quick about it. We have much work to do." As soon as she left, I finished the transfer and logged out, my heart pounding. I couldn't afford any more close calls. The stakes were too high. The next day, I arranged to meet Raphael in the forest. We needed to discuss our next move. The air was thick with tension as I approached the hidden spot, my senses on high alert. Raphael emerged from the shadows, his face grim. "Did you get it?" I nodded, handing him a flash drive. Everything: their plans, the data on the mutations, and the cure. He exhaled sharply, relief mingling with determination. "We need to get this to Dr. Bishop. He can help us distribute the cure and expose the genomic front." I agreed, but a sense of unease gnawed at me. "We have to be careful. They're watching me closely. If they suspect anything—" "We'll be ready," Raphael said firmly. "We'll protect our town no matter what." I felt a surge of gratitude and affection for him. He was risking everything to help me, to save Greenwood. And in that moment, I realized just how much I still cared for him. But there was no time to dwell on those feelings. We had a mission to complete, and failure wasn't an option. The following evening, we put our plan into action. Dr. Bishop had arranged for a secure location where we could distribute the cure and gather the affected residents. The old community center, now abandoned, would serve as our base of operations. Raphael and I moved under the cover of darkness, the weight of the flash drive heavy in my pocket. We navigated the winding forest paths, our footsteps muffled by the thick undergrowth. As we approached the community center, I felt a surge of hope. This was it, the moment we'd been working towards. But that hope was tinged with fear. We were about to challenge a powerful organization, and the consequences could be dire. Dr. Bishop met us at the entrance, his face lined with worry but resolute. "Do you have the data?" I handed him the flash drive. "Everything we need. But we have to move quickly. They'll notice I'm missing soon." He nodded, leading us inside. The center was a hive of activity, with residents huddled in groups, their faces etched with anxiety. We set up our equipment and began administering the cure. The process slow but steady. Hours passed in a blur of activity. I moved from person to person, administering the cure and recording their progress. Raphael worked beside me, his presence a constant source of strength. But as dawn approached, a commotion at the entrance drew our attention. A group of masked figures stormed in, weapons drawn. The genomic front had found us. "Stop!" one of them barked, his voice filled with authority. "Step away from the equipment." I felt a surge of fear, but I stood my ground. "We're curing these people. You can't stop us." The leader sneered. "You're playing with forces you don't understand. This is bigger than your little town." Before I could respond, a shot rang out, and chaos erupted. People screamed, scrambling for cover. Raphael grabbed my arm, pulling me behind a table. "We need to get out of here," he shouted over the noise. I nodded, my mind racing. We had to protect the cure, the data, everything we'd worked for. Together, we made our way towards the back exit, the sounds of gunfire and shouts echoing in the confined space. Dr. Bishop covered our retreat, his expression determined. "Go, I'll hold them off." I hesitated, not wanting to leave him, but Raphael pulled me away. "We have to go, Maya. We can't let them get the data." We burst through the back door, the cool morning air a stark contrast to the chaos inside. We ran through the forest, our breaths ragged, fear driving us forward. As we reached a safe distance, I collapsed against a tree, my heart pounding. Raphael crouched beside me, his hand on my shoulder. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with relief. "We got the cure out." I nodded, tears of relief and exhaustion streaming down my face. But at what cost? We sat in silence, the weight of the past hours pressing down on us. We had won a battle, but the war was far from over. The genomic front was still out there, and they wouldn't stop until they achieved their goals. But for now, we had a victory, and we would fight on, for Greenwood, for Lily, and for the future. The sleek, high-tech fortress of the Genomic Front's headquarters stood in stark contrast to the rustic charm of Greenwood. The facility was a monument to cutting-edge technology and sterile, futuristic aesthetics, with gleaming glass and steel structures that seemed almost alien amidst the dense, labyrinthine forest surrounding it. I'd spent weeks inside, playing the role of a dedicated researcher while covertly gathering evidence against them. Now, with the stolen data and the formula for the cure in hand, Raphael and I were ready to make our escape. The facility's hallways, lined with advanced surveillance systems and automated security drones, felt oppressive. Each step we took echoed with the tension of impending discovery. We had to be quick, silent, and precise. The data transfer was complete, and the cure was safely stored on a secure flash drive in my pocket. It was time to leave. "Ready?" Raphael whispered, his eyes scanning the corridor for any signs of movement. I nodded, feeling the weight of the data and the responsibility it carried. "Let's go." We moved swiftly through the labyrinthine corridors, navigating the facility with the map we'd memorized. Every turn felt like a gamble, every shadow a potential threat. Finally, we reached the exit, a heavy, reinforced door that led to the forest outside. Raphael punched in the security code, and the door slid open with a soft hiss. The forest beyond was dense and shadowed, the moonlight barely penetrating the thick canopy of leaves. It was a stark contrast to the clinical brightness of the headquarters. The underbrush was thick, the terrain uneven and treacherous. But we had no choice. We had to move. We slipped into the forest, our footsteps muffled by the thick layer of leaves and moss. The air was cool and damp, the scent of earth and vegetation mingling with the adrenaline coursing through my veins. We hadn't gotten far when I heard it, the faint hum of drones, the sound of pursuit. "They've discovered the theft," Raphael said, his voice low but urgent. "We need to move faster." We broke into a run, weaving through the trees and underbrush, our path illuminated only by the faint glow of the moon. The forest, once a familiar and comforting presence, now felt like a hostile labyrinth. The drone's hum grew louder, a relentless reminder of the danger we were in. The chase through the forest was a blur of motion and noise. We navigated through thick underbrush and rocky terrain, the sounds of pursuit growing ever closer. Branches snagged at our clothes, The uneven ground threatened to trip us at every step. The forest had become a battleground where nature and advanced science collided. "They're gaining on us," Raphael panted, his breath ragged. I scanned the darkness, looking for any sign of a way to shake them off. "This way," I shouted, veering off the path and plunging deeper into the forest. We had to lose them, had to find some way to get out of their sight. We zigzagged through the trees, the drone's lights flashing through the darkness like spectral fireflies. The terrain grew steeper, the ground underfoot turning to loose gravel and slippery moss. I stumbled, catching myself on a tree trunk just in time to avoid a fall. Raphael was right behind me, his face set with grim determination. A loud crack echoed through the forest. A gunshot. They weren't just using drones. They had armed operatives in pursuit. The realization sent a jolt of fear through me, but I pushed it down. We couldn't afford to be afraid. Not now. "Keep moving," I urged, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. We pressed on, the sounds of our pursuers growing fainter but no less persistent. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees like silent sentinels bearing witness to our desperate flight. My muscles ached, my breath coming in short, painful gasps. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. We reached a small clearing, the moonlight casting eerie shadows on the ground. It was a brief moment of respite, but it didn't last. The sound of footsteps, heavy and fast, shattered the quiet. Before I could react, a figure emerged from the trees, tackling Raphael to the ground. "No!" I screamed, turning to help him. But another figure appeared, grabbing me and pinning my arms behind my back. "Run, Maya!" Raphael shouted, struggling against his captor. "Go!" I hesitated, my heart tearing in two. I couldn't leave him, couldn't abandon him to the genomic front. But I had the data, the cure. We couldn't risk losing that. Torn between love and duty, I made the hardest decision of my life. "I'll come back for you," I promised, my voice breaking. Then I wrenched free from my captor and ran, the forest swallowing me whole. Every step away from Raphael felt like a betrayal. But I forced myself to keep going. I had to secure the data, had to get the cure to Greenwood. Raphael's sacrifice couldn't be in vain. The forest became a blur of shadows and sounds, my mind focused on one thing. Getting to safety. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing against a tree, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The forest was silent now, the pursuit gone. But the danger was far from over. I made my way back to Greenwood, the journey a haze of exhaustion and fear. The town's lights were a beacon in the darkness, a reminder of what I was fighting for. As I entered the town square, the familiar sights and sounds brought a sense of comfort. But it was fleeting. There was still so much to do. I headed straight to the clinic, where Dr. Bishop was waiting. His face was drawn with worry, but he brightened when he saw me. "You made it," he said, relief evident in his voice. "Where's Raphael?" "He was captured," I said, the words like a knife to my heart. "We have to go back for him. But first, we need to distribute the cure." Dr. Bishop nodded, his expression grim. "We'll get him back. But first, let's save our town." We worked through the night, modifying the cure to reverse the mutations. It was a painstaking process, but we couldn't afford to make mistakes. The residents of Greenwood began to file in, their faces etched with hope and fear. Each injection was a step towards healing. Each person cured a victory against the genomic front. As dawn broke, the townspeople began to show signs of improvement. The mutations receded, replaced by relief and gratitude. The weight of the past weeks lifted, but the sense of loss for Raphael remained heavy on my heart. With the immediate crisis averted, our focus shifted to rescuing Raphael. Dr. Bishop, realizing the error of his ways, rallied the townspeople. We couldn't storm the genomic front's headquarters, but we could find ways to pressure them, to expose their actions to the world. News of the genomic front's experiments began to spread. The evidence we'd gathered, igniting a firestorm of outrage. International organizations took notice, and the genomic front found themselves under siege from all sides. It was a small comfort knowing that justice would be served, but it didn't lessen my determination to rescue Raphael. Finally, we received word from an insider within the genomic front. Raphael was alive, being held in a secure location. It took days of planning and coordination, but we managed to orchestrate a daring rescue. The moment I saw Raphael, bruised but alive, relief washed over me like a tidal wave. "I knew you'd come for me," he said, his voice weak but filled with faith. "Always," I replied, tears blurring my vision. "Always."